You didn't fight them. That's the part they're still trying to figure out months later when they replay the sequence in their heads and try to identify the moment they lost. There was no confrontation. There was no big meeting where you laid out your grievances. There was no email chain, no ultimatum, no dramatic exit. You just kept showing up, being pleasant, doing your work. And while you were being pleasant, you were also doing something else. Something they didn't clock at the time, because it didn't look like anything at all. By the time they noticed the shape of what you'd been doing, the shape was already complete, and there was nothing they could do about it. You'd won, and they were still standing where they'd been standing when the game started, wondering when it had ended. The people who lose to this kind of move almost always want a confrontation, because confrontation is what they were braced for. They'd built defenses against every argument you might make. They'd rehearsed their counter-arguments. They'd prepared their allies. They were ready for the fight. What they weren't ready for was your refusal to have the fight in the first place. You looked at the terrain and saw that the fight itself was the trap, that engaging on their terms, in the arena they'd prepared, would have handed them the advantage, so you didn't engage. You moved around the arena instead. You built what you needed to build somewhere else quietly, while they kept sharpening their weapons for a battle that never came. The specific moves you made were unremarkable individually. You had coffee with a person nobody thought was important. You said yes to a project that seemed too small to matter. You spent extra time on something in a corner of the organization that everyone else considered irrelevant. You built a relationship with someone the powerful people had written off as not worth cultivating. Each move, seen in isolation, looked like ordinary professional behavior, maybe a little unfocused, maybe a little strange in its priorities, but nothing to worry about. What nobody saw was the pattern connecting the moves. You'd identified where the actual leverage was going to be 6 months out, and you'd started positioning yourself near it, while everyone else was still competing for the leverage that was visible right now.
What you executed has a name, and the name has been dragged through centuries of misuse. Machiavellian. The word has come to mean something almost cartoonishly evil in ordinary conversation. But the original ideas were about something more specific. The willingness to see how power actually operates, rather than how you'd prefer it to operate, and to act on the accurate picture rather than the flattering one. Most people are running on a mixture of wishful thinking and inherited stories about fairness. They believe that if they work hard, keep their head down, and do the right thing, the system will recognize and reward them. Sometimes it does. Often it doesn't. The people who consistently come out ahead are the ones who've stopped believing in the story and started paying attention to the actual mechanics underneath it. The mechanics underneath most organizational and social situations are simpler than they look. Once you accept a few unpleasant truths about them, power flows toward people who have information others don't have. Power flows toward people who've built relationships before those relationships became obviously valuable. Power flows toward people who've made themselves useful in ways that create dependencies without ever announcing that dependencies are being created. Power flows toward people who let others underestimate them, because being underestimated is the single most useful position in any competitive environment. None of this is taught in school. Most of it is actively denied by the official stories organizations tell about themselves. But every one of these principles operates constantly, and the people who see them operating have an enormous advantage over the people who don't. The reason your approach worked is that direct challenge is almost always a losing strategy for the person who's currently outranked. When you challenge someone directly, you activate their defenses, mobilize their allies, and give them a clear target to organize against. You also force the situation onto the terrain they've already mapped, where they have the advantage. Direct challenge works for people who already have equal or greater power than their opponent. For everyone else, it's a way of losing quickly while feeling righteous about the loss. The alternative isn't cowardice. It's patience combined with accurate perception. You wait, you position, you build the pieces you need in places your opponent isn't watching, and when the moment comes, you don't need to challenge them at all. You've already made their position irrelevant. There's a particular psychological blindness that afflicts people who currently hold power, and it works in your favor if you understand it. People who have power tend to assume the current arrangement is stable, that the sources of their power will continue to be the sources of power, that the criteria that made them successful will continue to be the criteria. This assumption is almost always wrong over any long enough time horizon. Situations change. The skills that mattered 5 years ago aren't the skills that will matter 5 years from now. The relationships that were central are being replaced by relationships that are currently peripheral. The people who see the change coming and reposition themselves early look. To the people who don't see it coming, like they've been extraordinarily lucky, they haven't been lucky. They've been paying attention to what the people in power stopped paying attention to.
The first principle worth internalizing from what you just did is that patience is a strategic asset that most people can't sustain. The reason your moves worked is that they required a longer time horizon than your opponents were operating on. They wanted results this quarter. You were building for 2 years out. In the gap between their timeline and yours, you had operational room they didn't have. Almost every environment you'll ever compete in rewards longer time horizons than the average participant can maintain. If you can hold a 2-year view when everyone around you is holding a 6-month view, you're operating in a different game than they are, and you'll consistently outperform them. The catch is that the 2-year view requires you to sit through periods where nothing visible is happening, and most people can't tolerate the invisibility. Learn to tolerate it. That's the price of admission to the longer game. A discipline that will serve you across every domain is the discipline of building relationships before you need them. The people who are useful to you in a crisis are almost never the people you cultivated during the crisis. They're the people you had coffee with 2 years ago, before you knew you'd need them, when you had nothing specific to ask them for. The absence of an immediate ask is what makes the relationship real. When you build relationships with people only when they can do something for you, they know it, and the relationship never develops the depth that makes it useful in a real emergency. Invest in people who currently have nothing to offer you. Invest in the assistant, the junior colleague, the person in a role that seems peripheral. In 5 years, some of them will be in positions that matter, and the relationship you built when they were nobody will be worth more than any relationship you could try to build when there's somebody. There's a habit worth developing around information. Most people share what they know reflexively. It feels good to be the one who knows things, and telling others is how you convert information into social currency. This is almost always a bad trade. The information you share loses its value the moment you share it, and the temporary boost in social standing rarely translates into any durable advantage. The people who come out ahead are the ones who treat information as capital rather than as currency. They hold on to it. They release it strategically, at moments when releasing it creates leverage rather than just conversation. This doesn't mean being secretive about everything. It means being deliberate about what you share, with whom, and when.